Welcome to Molly's Playground, a pole dancer's perspective on mindset, identity, and taking up space. This is a podcast for the people who are done shrinking themselves. Here we break free from expectations, perfectionism, fear, and all of the things that keeps us small. True movement, honest conversations, rebellious reflections, and the world of pole dance. We explore what it really means to stand strong in yourself, trust your own voice, and take up space unapologetically. So fuck the norm, fuck who you're supposed to be, and fuck the idea that you need permission to exist fully. I'm your host, certified life coach, international pole dance educator, and professional oversharer, Molly Pretzel. Let's fucking go. Hi love, I want to share something today that feels a little vulnerable to share, because I think it's one of those topics that comes with so much shame. And it's also one of those topics where people have really strong opinions. Can I admit something that feels almost socially unacceptable? I don't really care about family traditions. I forget birthdays. I don't care much about anniversaries. Family has never been something that has come naturally to me. And for years, I genuinely believed that meant that there was something wrong with me. So today I want to talk to you about family shame. And before we go any further, I want to make something crystal clear. This is not an episode about blaming my family. This is not me trying to point fingers or tell you that I had a terrible childhood, because that's not how I see it. I love my dad deeply. He passed away not too long ago, and I am incredibly grateful that he was my dad and my primary caretaker when I was a child. He taught me courage. He taught me to chase my dreams. He taught me to think for myself instead of just following everyone else. A huge part of who I am today exists solely because of him. But two things can't be true at the same time. You can deeply love the people who raised you and still acknowledge that they shaped you in a way you're trying to understand as an adult. And I think that's where this episode starts. Because when I look back at my childhood, family just looked different from what I saw around me. Birthdays weren't really celebrated after we became teenagers. Family gatherings were not just something that happened naturally. We weren't expected to spend every holiday together. Things like Easter lunches, which are a huge tradition here in Denmark, just weren't really part of my life. Dates didn't matter very much, tradition didn't matter very much, and because of that, family never became something that felt automatic or instinctive to me. Now, I want to be really careful here. I'm not saying that's good, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm simply saying that's what shaped me. Because I think there's something we forget. The things that feel completely natural to you today probably don't feel natural because you consciously choose them. They feel natural because you practiced them for years without even realizing it. And I didn't practice family. So now as an adult, I see it showing up everywhere. I naturally keep a little distance from family constellations, even with my amazing family-in-law, who have welcomed me with open arms. I still notice that instinct to take a step back sometimes. When my friends start having children of their own and building their own little families, I sometimes find myself pulling away instead of moving closer. Not because I don't love them, not because I'm not happy for them, but because that's what feels familiar to me. I forget birthdays, I forget anniversaries, not because I don't care about people, but because those things were never wired into my brain as something important. And then comes the shame, because eventually you start collecting evidence that maybe you're just different in the wrong way. Maybe you're cold, maybe you're selfish, maybe you're just a bad family member. And for years I thought that was the truth. Not that I had been shaped differently, but that there was simply something wrong with me. Have you ever noticed how quickly we label ourselves as the problem? Like when you say, I don't like family gatherings, I forget birthdays, I don't really care about traditions, I don't feel the way everyone else seems to feel, and almost immediately our brains jumps to, well, there must be something wrong with me. But what if that's the wrong question? What if the question isn't, what's wrong with me? What if it's what shaped me? Because here's the thing. None of us arrive in adulthood as a blank slate. Every single one of us has been taught without anyone necessarily sitting us down and teaching us. We learn by watching, we learn by repeating, we learn by adapting, we learn by surviving. If your family celebrated birthdays with excitement every single year, then celebrating birthdays probably feel natural to you. If your family hugged all of the time, closeness probably feels safe. If tradition meant connection, traditions probably feel meaningful to you. But if your experience was different, why would you expect yourself to experience those things in exactly the same way as someone who has grown up in a different environment and in a different way? That doesn't mean you're cold, that doesn't mean you're selfish. It doesn't mean you're a bad daughter, a bad son, a bad sibling, or a bad family member. It means you've been shaped by different experiences. And that realization, one of the kindest things we can give ourselves. Because the moment we stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what shaped me, we stop making our personality the problem. We become curious instead of ashamed. And curiosity is where change becomes possible. Not because you're trying to become someone else, but because you're finally looking at yourself with understanding instead of judgment. This episode isn't really about having a good family or a bad family. It's about something much deeper, in my opinion. It's about the shame that can come from growing up differently than the people around you. It's about realizing that the way you experience family, traditions, closeness, birthdays, holidays, or even relationships today might not actually be your personality. It might simply be what you have been shaped by. And I want to explore what happens when we stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking what shaped me. Because I really believe those are two completely different conversations. I think this matters because so many of us spend years trying to fix ourselves. When the first thing we actually need is understanding, we're so quick to judge ourselves. Why am I like this? Why can't I just be normal? Why does everyone else seem to find this so easy? But shame rarely creates change. Most of the time, shame just makes us hide. It makes us distance ourselves. It makes us believe that if we were just a little different, people would finally understand us. And I don't think that's where real growth starts. I think real growth starts with honesty, not blaming, not making excuses, just understanding where are you today, because you can't choose where to go next until you know where you're standing. This episode is for you if you ever felt like you're the odd one out in your own family. It's for you if you ever looked at other people's families and thought, why doesn't it feel like that for me? It's for you if birthdays, traditions, or family gatherings feels more exhausting than exciting. It's for you if you've ever been told you're cold or selfish or distant, when deep down you know that's not your intention. It's for you if you've ever felt guilty for needing distance from people you're supposed to love. It's for you if you find yourself pulling away when your friends start having children and creating families of their own, and you don't really understand why. It's for you if you have ever caught yourself thinking, maybe there's just something wrong with me. And love, even if your family isn't a topic, maybe your childhood shaped your relationship with conflict or success or rest or love. The mechanism is exactly the same. The interesting thing is that this kind of shame rarely announces itself. It doesn't usually walk into the room and into your life saying, hello, I am family shame. Instead, it shows up in small moments. Like when you forget somebody's birthday, you avoid calling your parents, you feel uncomfortable at family dinners without really knowing why. You start pulling away when your friends become parents. You struggle to understand why tradition means so much to other people. someone says, but it's family, and suddenly you feel defensive before you even opened your mouth. Or maybe you spent years trying to become the kind of person who naturally loves all of those things, without ever stopping to ask whether you're trying to become the person because you really want to, or because you spent years believing that's the version of you that's finally acceptable. And I think that's why this conversation is so damn important. Because until we understand what shaped us, we'll keep judging ourselves for reacting exactly the way we were taught to. One thing I really want to ask before we dive any deeper into today's episode: if at any point while you're listening, you find yourself thinking, oh, that sounds like my sister, this sounds like my partner, this sounds like my best friend, or even I wish someone had said this to me years ago, then I would love if you would share this episode with them. Because shame grows in silence. The moment we realize we're not the only one that feels this way, something starts to soften. Sometimes one conversation or one podcast episode is enough to make someone stop and think, there's not something wrong with me. And instead start thinking, maybe I've just been shaped by something different. And if this episode can do that for even one person because you decided to send it to them, I think that's pretty fucking amazing. So thank you for being here. And thank you for helping me create conversations that remind people they're not alone. I think one of the hardest part about shame is that it rarely comes from one single event. It gets reinforced over and over again, especially by people who think they're helping. Maybe you've heard things like, but it's family, you will regret this one day. You only get one family, you're hurting people. Or maybe it's not even said out loud, maybe it's the look, the disappointment, the silence, the feeling that everyone else understands something you somehow missed. And here's the thing, when you're already carrying shame around, this topic, those comments don't create understanding, they create more shame. Because you're not hearing, I'd love to understand you. You're hearing, see, I knew there was something wrong with you. And that's such an important difference. Because I don't know a single person who has ever been shamed into feeling safe. I don't know anyone who has been shamed into connection. I don't know anyone who has been shamed into becoming more open. Most of us do the exact opposite. We defend ourselves, we withdraw, we distance ourselves even more. Not because we don't care, but because we're trying to protect the part of ourselves that already feels deeply misunderstood. And I think that's why shame is such a terrible teacher. It doesn't invite curiosity, it invites survival. Okay, and honey, I want to tell you something. There was one day I realized something that completely changed the way I look at myself. It almost felt painfully obvious when I saw it. The people who taught me what family is are also the people who taught me to feel ashamed around family. Just let that sink in for a second. Because that realization changed everything for me. Not because it suddenly made everything easy, it didn't, but it gave me context. It helped me understand that the way I experience family today didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't mean I was cold or broken or incapable of loving people. It meant that my brain had learned something. And if I have learned something, then maybe the goal isn't to judge myself for it. Maybe the goal is simply to understand it first. Because I think that's where shame starts to loosen its grip. The moment you stop seeing yourself as the problem and start seeing yourself as someone who can be shaped by their experiences, that's completely different. And that's a completely different conversation. And in my opinion, a much kinder one. One of the biggest shifts I have had in my own life has been realizing that understanding isn't the same thing as blaming. Because I know as soon as we start talking about childhood, family, or the people who raised us, people almost automatically think, oh, so now we're blaming our parents. That's not what I'm doing. Actually, I think blame keeps us stuck just as much as shame does. because blame still puts all of our attention on the past. Understanding is different. Understanding is simply saying, this is what shaped me, nothing more, nothing less. Because the moment I understand that my relationship with my family didn't come out of nowhere, I stopped making it mean that there was something wrong with me. I wasn't broken, I was shaped. That's one of the most compassionate things we can say to ourselves, not because it removes responsibility, but because it removes unnecessary shame. Once you understand what shaped you, I actually don't think the most important question is, what happened? You've probably spent years asking yourself that already. The question I find much more helpful is, now that I know where I am, where do I want to go? Because that's the first question that gives you your power back. It moves you from understanding to choosing. I always think about it like trying to jump onto a box. If I have absolutely no idea how high I can jump today, how am I supposed to know which box to pick and what size is the right size for me? If I keep choosing one that's way too high, I'm going to keep crashing into it. And eventually I'm going to stop believing in myself, not because I'm incapable, but because I never started from where I actually was. I think we do this to ourselves emotionally all of the time. We compare ourselves to people who grow up differently, who were shaped differently, and then we expect ourselves to naturally think like them, feel like them, love the same things they love, value the same traditions, want the same kind of relationship. But why would we? If our starting point are completely different, our first step can't look the same either. And I think that's why self-development doesn't begin with ambition. It begins with honesty, with being willing to say, this is where I am today, without making that mean you're failing. And here's the part I love the most, because once you know where you're standing, you actually have a choice. And I don't think there is one right answer. Maybe you will realize family is something I actually want more of. I want traditions. I want to become better at remembering birthdays. I want to create something different from where I grew up. Amazing. Good for you. Now you know what you want to practice. But maybe you discover something else. Maybe you realize, actually, I don't really care about traditions. I don't want to force myself into someone else's idea of what family should look like. Love, that's okay too. That's perfect too. Because the goal isn't to become more like everyone else. The goal is to remove the shame around where you are today. So that whatever you choose next, it is actually your choice, not one that shame made for you. You're not broken, you're shaped. And once you understand what shaped you, you get to decide what comes next. Stop asking yourself, what's wrong with me? Start asking yourself, what shaped me? Because those two questions lead to completely different lives. One creates shame, the other one creates understanding, and understanding creates choice. You're not the problem you're trying to solve. You're a human being who has been shaped by experiences, relationships, and environments that you didn't choose. That doesn't mean you have to stay exactly as you are, but it does mean you deserve to stop judging yourself for being exactly where you are today. Because here's what I believe. You're not broken, you are shaped. And once you understand what shaped you, you get to decide what you want to build next. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, that does make sense, but how do I actually know what shaped me? Because I think that's where a lot of people get stuck. The moment we start talking about childhood or family, we either do one of two things. We blame everything on our past, or we dismiss it completely. That happened years ago. I have moved on. It wasn't even that bad. But I don't think either of those responses is very helpful. Because the goal isn't to live in the past. The goal is to understand why the present feels the way it does. I think our adult lives leave little breadcrumbs everywhere. The things that trigger us, the things we avoid, the situation that make us feel guilty, the conversations that make us shut down, the relationship we keep creating. They're all trying to tell us something. Not because we are broken, but because they've been shaped by something. So instead of asking, was my childhood good or bad? I think a much more interesting question is, what feels completely normal to me that someone else might have learned completely differently? Because that's why I start finding answers, not by digging for trauma, but by becoming curious about the things I had always assumed were just personality or my personality. And once I started doing that, I realized there was so much of me that wasn't actually my identity, it was simply my starting point. I think this is the part that fascinates me the most. Because I don't actually think we wake up one day and decide to feel ashamed. I think shame happens when we compare our natural way of being to someone else's normal. Think about it. If you grew up in a family where birthdays were a huge deal, of course remembering birthdays feels natural. If every Saturday was spent together, of course family gatherings feel important. If the traditions were something that create safety and connection, why wouldn't you continue them as an adult? You've been practicing those things your entire life. Not consciously, just naturally. But if you didn't grow up with that, why would you expect those things to feel automatic? Why would they suddenly become instinctive just because you're an adult? To me, that expectation doesn't really make sense. I think this is where we become unfair to ourselves because we compare the outcome without ever comparing the starting point. We look at someone who naturally called their parents every week, who never forgets a birthday, who loved having the whole family together, and we think, why can't I just be like that? But we completely ignore that they might have spent 20 or 30 years practicing exactly those behaviors. You have practiced something different, so of course your default is different. That doesn't make you wrong, it makes you human. And I actually think that's true for almost everything in life. Nobody expects someone who has never danced before to suddenly move like a professional dancer. Nobody expects someone who has never spoken English to suddenly become fluent overnight. Because we all understand that those things require repetition, practice, exposure, and time. But when it comes to relationships, we suddenly expect ourselves to know how to do something we have never really experienced, as if connection should just come naturally, as if tradition should suddenly matter, as if family should automatically feel safe simply because they're family. And I don't think that's how human beings work. I actually don't think the problem is that we are different. I think the problem is that the story we tell ourselves about being different. Because instead of thinking, I never really learned this, we think there's something wrong with me. That's shame. Not because we're different, but because we have turned that difference into a judgment about our worth. And that's such an important distinction. Because if it's a skill you never really learned, you can practice it if you want to, or you can decide it isn't actually that important to you. But neither option requires shame, only awareness. And I think that's one of the biggest mindset shifts I have ever had. I stopped asking myself why I wasn't more like everyone else and started asking myself, compared to what I experienced growing up, does it actually make sense that this feels natural to me? And almost every single time, the answer was yes. One of the biggest misconceptions in personal development is believing that awareness instantly creates change. I wished it worked like that. I really do, but it doesn't. Because I can sit here all day and tell you exactly why family feels different to me. I understand where it comes from. I understand what shaped me, and yet I still notice myself pulling away sometimes. I still forget birthdays. I still don't naturally think about traditions. Not because I haven't learned anything, but because awareness doesn't erase years of conditioning. Understanding is the beginning, not the finish line. And that's important to remember, because otherwise we end up shaming ourselves for not changing fast enough. We tell ourselves, I know better now, so why am I still doing this? But knowing and automatically reacting are two completely different things. Your brain will almost always choose what's familiar before it chooses what's intentional. That's just how we are wired. Which means change isn't about having one big realization, it's about gently practicing something different over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I think something else makes this even harder. You're trying to change while living in a world that constantly reminds you how you should be. Family is probably one of the biggest examples of that. We are surrounded by messages about what a good daughter looks like, what a good son looks like, what a close family should look like. Christmas movies, social media, family photos, holiday traditions, people saying, but it's family, as if that sentence explained anything. And if your experience doesn't match the picture, it's so easy to think you're the exception, that you're the broken one. But I don't actually think the shame comes from being different. I think it comes from believing there's only one right way to be a family. And I don't believe that's true. Some people feel safest seeing their family every week. Some people like better seeing them twice a year. Some people build families through blood. Some people build families through friendship. Some people create traditions that looks nothing like the ones they grew up with. None of those are automatically more right than others. The question isn't, does my family look like everyone else's? The question is, does this way of doing relationship align with the life I'm trying to build for myself? Because that's completely different and it's a completely different standard. A much kinder one. Your nervous system doesn't care what you understand or understood. It responds to what feels familiar. Now, the conversation gets really interesting, because if everything we have talked about so far is true, if you're not broken, if you've simply been shaped, then maybe we have been trying to solve the wrong problem all along. Maybe the goal was never to become more like everyone else. Maybe the goal was to stop fighting yourself. Because think about how much energy we spend trying to become the person we think we should be, the daughter we should be, the sibling we should be, the family member we should be, the person who naturally loves Christmas, the person who remembers every birthday, the person who can't wait for family dinners. But what if that's never who you were supposed to become? Sometimes I wonder, what would your life look like if you removed the shame before trying to change your behavior? Because I think we often do it the other way around. We tell ourselves, once I'm better at this, then I will stop feeling ashamed. But what if it actually works in reverse? What if removing the shame is what finally gives you enough safety to choose differently? Because it's very difficult to make conscious choices when you are busy defending yourself. It's very difficult to build connection when you're constantly trying to prove you're not a bad person. And maybe, just maybe, the life you're looking for doesn't begin with becoming someone else. It begins with making peace with who you already are. Because imagine waking up and no longer making every difference mean you're failing. Imagine being able to say, this doesn't come naturally to me, without immediately adding, therefore I'm a bad person. Imagine being able to create traditions because you actually do want them, not because you're trying to earn your place. Imagine choosing how family looks in your life instead of automatically repeating your past or automatically rebelling against it. That to me is freedom, not living somebody else's version of family, not living your childhood's version of it either, but consciously building your own. And I think that's where the conversation really begins, because if that's possible, how do we actually start doing so? So let me simplify this as much as I possibly can. I actually think there are two stories you can tell yourself. The first one is, I'm different, therefore something is wrong with me. The second one, I'm different because I've been shaped by different experiences. The behavior is exactly the same. Maybe you still forget birthdays. Maybe family still doesn't come natural. Maybe traditions still aren't your thing. Nothing has changed yet, except one thing: the story you're telling yourself. And I think that story changes everything because one creates shame, the other creates understanding, and understanding gives you choices. So if you want to change your life, I actually don't think the first step is changing your behavior. I think the first step is changing the meaning you attach to your behavior. Instead of saying I'm bad at relationships, maybe it's relationships look different where I grew up. Instead of saying I'm terrible at being a family member, maybe it's family was never something I have learned in the same way as other people did. Do you hear the difference? One is an identity, the other one is information. And information is something we can work with. Identity feels permanent. That's why I think changing the story matters so much more. Not because it magically changes your life overnight, but because it changes the place you're trying to grow from. And I would much rather grow from understanding than from shame. And I think this is where I have landed. Because if you've been listening to this episode thinking, I'm about to tell you that I have suddenly become this incredibly family oriented person, I am going to disappoint you. I didn't. I'm still not the person who naturally loves every family tradition. I'm still not someone who gets excited about every holiday. Birthdays still don't come natural to me. Some of those things will probably always require intention rather than instinct. And honestly, I'm okay with that now. Because I don't actually think healing means becoming the most traditional family person in the room. I think healing means deciding what genuinely matters to you and then building that on purpose. I think my sister is the best example of this because neither of us really had a manual for what a close family relationship looked like. Nobody handed us a blueprint. Nobody showed us exactly how to do it. So we had to build it ourselves through conversation by conversation, choice by choice, mistake by mistake. We didn't build a traditional relationship. We built our relationship. Today, she's not just my sister. She is one of my best friends. Not because it happened automatically, but because we both decided it mattered enough to create something different. And I think that's a really important distinction. We didn't have to become different people first. We didn't have to fix ourselves before we were allowed to have a meaningful relationship. We simply started building one. At the beginning of this episode, I told you that I spent years believing there was something wrong with me. Today, I don't believe that anymore. Today, I think I was shaped by my experiences, by my childhood, by my family, by everything that taught me what relationships look like. And knowing that has been one of the most freeing realizations of my life. Because if was shaped, then I can also keep shaping not my past, not people around me, but my future. The relationships I choose to invest in, the traditions I decided to create, the kind of family I want to build, the life I want to live. And I think that's the most beautiful part. You don't have to become someone else. You simply get to decide what you want to shape next. I'm not a traditional family person, and I have no intention of becoming one. What I do have is a sister that I have decided to create a weird-ass family relation with, neighbors who is my chosen family, and a man that I love to the moon. And yes, if he asked me to tweak my family values a bit, I might consider it. Now, maybe you're sitting there thinking, okay, I get it. I understand where this comes from. I don't feel as broken anymore. But then comes the next question. What do I actually do with that? Because understanding yourself is incredibly powerful, but it's not the same as living differently. At some point, all of these realizations have to leave your head and start becoming part of your everyday life. And I don't think that's happened through one big decision. I think it happens through lots of really small ones, through noticing yourself, through catching the old stories before it takes over, through asking yourself a slightly different question. Not every time, just one more time than you did yesterday, because that's how I have experienced change, not as a life-changing moment, but as hundreds of tiny moments where I slowly stopped treating myself like I was the problem and instead started treating myself like someone I was trying to understand. So let me share a few things that has helped me, not because I think they are the right answers for everyone, but because they have helped me move from simply understanding my patterns to actually living a little differently. So, what has actually helped me? Definitely not trying to become someone else. For years, I thought the solution was to become more like the people around me, to care about the things they cared about, to naturally want the same kind of family life, to somehow become better at family. But that never really worked, because every attempt started from the belief that there was something wrong with me. And I don't think shame is a very good place to build a life from. What actually helped me was something much simpler. I stopped trying to become someone else and started trying to understand myself better. Every time I caught myself thinking, why am I like this? I tried replacing it with, does it actually make sense that I feel this way? And most of the time, the answer was yes. Not because I wanted to stay stuck or throw blame around, but because understanding creates so much more room for change than self judgment ever will. The second thing that really helped me is realizing that just because something doesn't come naturally to me doesn't mean I can't choose it intentionally. And I think that's a really important distinction because there are things I have decided mattered to me, even though they didn't happen automatically. Birthdays are probably the best example. I love celebrating my own birthday now, not because that's how I grew up, actually, quite the opposite. I think that's exactly why it matters to me today. Because celebrating my birthday feels like telling myself I'm allowed to take up space, I'm allowed to be celebrated, I'm allowed to let people love me. So now I intentionally create something I never really experienced as I got older. Not because I have to, because I want to. And those are two different motivations. Another thing I have learned is that it's okay to build little systems around the places where things doesn't come naturally. For example, I'm terrible at remembering birthdays. I always have been, not because I don't care about people. My brain just doesn't naturally attach importance to dates. So my sister helps me. Sometimes she will text me, sometimes she will call me, hey, don't forget this and that's birthday tomorrow, or this and that's anniversary. And I actually love that. Years ago, I probably would have thought I should be able to do this by myself. Now I just think this is how my brain works. And this is one way I can take care of the people I love. I don't think asking for support makes us weaker. I think it helps us build lives that automatically fit us. But if I'm completely honest, the biggest change isn't actually that I remember more birthdays or that I suddenly became a family person. The biggest change is much quieter than that. I don't spend nearly as much time arguing with myself anymore. I don't automatically assume I'm wrong because I'm different. I don't automatically think I need to become someone else before I'm worthy of love or connection. That inner fight has become so much smaller. And I think that's what healing has looked like for me. Not becoming a different person, but becoming much kinder towards the person I already was. Because once I stopped fighting myself, I finally had enough energy to start building the life that actually felt true to me. If you want to take just one thing away from today, the next time you notice yourself judging something about yourself, pause. And instead of asking, why am I like this? Ask yourself, what might have shaped me? Not to excuse it, not to blame anybody, just to understand it, because the moment you become curious, you stop making yourself the enemy. The second thing I would invite you to think about is this. Is this actually something I want to change? Or is it something I think I should change because someone else told me that's what a good person does? I think that's such an important distinction because we spend so much of our life chasing somebody else's definition of enough, somebody else's definition of a good daughter, a good son, a good what fucking ever. But before you start changing yourself, ask yourself one simple question. If nobody judged me for this, would I still want to change it? Because the answer might surprise you. Maybe the answer is yes. Maybe you have always wanted more closeness, more tradition, more connections. Beautiful. Now you're moving towards something that actually matters to you. But maybe the answer is no. Maybe you realize you have only been carrying shame because you've been comparing yourself to a version of family that was never yours to begin with. And that's important to know. And maybe my favorite question of them all, instead of asking, how do I become a better family member, try asking, what kind of relationship do I actually want to build? Because those aren't the same questions. One is about proving something. The other is about creating something. And I think that's where your energy belongs. Not in proving that you are enough, but in building relationship that feels honest. Relationship that fits who you are, not who shame told you that you had to become. The reason I love questions like these is because they don't tell you what the answer should be. They simply help you separate three things that so many of us have mixed together. What happened to me? Who am I today? And who I want to become. Those are three different situations. And if we don't separate them, we are not believing that our past automatically decides our future. But it doesn't. Your past explains your starting point. It doesn't have to dictate your destination. And I think that's one of the most empowering things we can remember. Because the goal isn't to erase your past. The goal isn't to become someone else. The goal is to stop letting shame make your decisions for you. And once shame is no longer in the driver's seat, you will finally get to choose your own direction. Your past explains you, it doesn't define you. I also want to prepare you for something because I think this is where a lot of people give up. Not because they're doing it wrong, but because they think feeling uncomfortable means they're doing it wrong. And that's not true. If you have spent 20 or 30 years believing there's something wrong with me, that story doesn't disappear after listening to one podcast episode. You will probably still hear that voice. You'll still have moments where someone says, but it's family, and suddenly all of the old thoughts come rushing back. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm selfish. Maybe I should just try harder. And that's okay, because your brain isn't broken. It's simply repeating a story that's practiced for years. One of the biggest mistakes we make is believing that healing means that the old thoughts disappear. I don't think they do. At least they haven't for me. The difference is, I don't believe every thought anymore. Years ago, I would have thoughts like, you're a terrible family member, and I would immediately accept it as something that was true. Today I notice it, I get curious about it, and then I ask myself, is that actually true? Or is that just an old story trying to protect me? And this is exactly why I think thought work is so important, because most of us think we are reacting to what's happening around us, but we are not. We are reacting to what we are making it mean. Two people can hear the exact same sentence. You forgot my birthday. One will think I'm such a terrible person, and the other one thinks, oh shit, you're right, I'm sorry. Let me put a reminder in my calendar next year. Same situation. Completely different emotional experiences, not because the situation changed, but because the meaning changed. And that's where our freedom lives. Not in controlling other people, not in making everyone understand us, but in becoming aware of the stories running inside of our own head. So, what do I actually do now? I think my main answer would be I try to slow the fuck down. When I notice shame showing up, I don't immediately assume I'm telling myself the truth. I ask myself instead, what am I thinking right now? What is the thought that's making me feel shameful? What am I making this mean about me? Is this thought helping me build the kind of life I actually want or not? Because sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes I really want to change something. Maybe I forgot somebody's birthday and I realize actually I do want to get better at that. Great. Then I will put it in my calendar and practice. I'll ask my sister to remind me. I will build a system. But sometimes the only thing I want to change is the shame. The behavior isn't actually the problem. The story I have attached to it is. And learning to tell those apart has probably been one of the biggest gifts coaching has given me. I think there's something really important to point out here. Thought work isn't about convincing yourself that everything is fine. It's not toxic positivity. It is not pretending you never hurt anymore. Sometimes we do hurt people. Sometimes we do make mistakes. Thought work doesn't remove responsibility. It removes unnecessary suffering. It helps you to separate these two very different statements. I did something that hurt someone and I'm a bad person. That are not the same sentence. It's not the same thing, honey. So before we wrap up, let's just bring everything together. If you've been listening to this, thinking maybe there's something wrong with me, I hope today's episode has given you a different perspective. Maybe there isn't anything wrong with you. Maybe you've simply been shaped by experiences that taught you a different version of what family looks like. And if that's true, then the goal isn't to erase your past. The goal isn't to become someone else's version of a good family member. The goal is to understand yourself well enough that you can start making conscious choices instead of shame-driven ones, because that's the difference. Shame tells you, become someone else. Understanding, ask, who do I actually want to become from here? And that's a so much kinder question. So if there's one thing I hope you remember after today's episode, it would be this. You're not broken. You are shaped. And once you understand what shaped you, you get to decide what you want to build next. I think one of the biggest misconceptions about self-development is that understanding your past means you're blaming your past. I don't believe that at all. To me, understanding is simply gathering information, because how can you decide where you want to go if you have no idea where you're starting from? Remember the box. If I have no clue how high I can jump, I might pick a box that is way too high. And then I keep throwing myself at it over and over and over again and wondering, why am I failing? Not because I'm lazy, not because I'm weak, not because I'm incapable, but because I never stop to ask, where am I actually starting from? I think we do exactly the same thing emotionally. We compare ourselves to people who were shaped differently. We expect ourselves to naturally love the things they love, to value the things they value, to feel what they feel. And when we don't, we make ourselves wrong. But here's the absolute beautiful part. The goal isn't to become like somebody else. The goal is to become conscious, to be able to say, this is who I am today, this is what shaped me, this is why family feels so difficult, this is why traditions don't come naturally to me, And then from that place, you get to make an adult decision. Do you actually want to change this? Or do I simply want to stop apologizing for it? Because both are valid. You are allowed to build new traditions. You are allowed to create your own version of family. You are allowed to stay exactly where you are if that is what feels right to you. The only thing I hope you don't do is spend the rest of your life believing that you're broken. Because you're not. You're just shaped. And the beautiful thing about being shaped is that the story doesn't end there. You still get to decide what you're going to build next. I really hope that when you finish this episode, you leave with a little more compassion for yourself than you had when you pressed play. Because I know what it's like to believe you're the problem. I know what it's like to look at other people's lives and wonder, why doesn't that come naturally to me? But maybe that's the wrong comparison. Maybe your job isn't to become more like everyone else. Maybe your job is to understand yourself well enough that you can build a life that's actually yours. Because that's the beautiful thing about being shaped. Being shaped doesn't mean you're finished. It simply means you have had a starting point. And from today, you get to keep shaping. One choice, one conversation, one relationship, one tradition, one act of self-compassion at a time. If you forget everything else we have talked about today, I hope you remember this. You're not broken, you're shaped. Your past explains you, it doesn't define you. And once you understand what shaped you, you get to decide what you want to shape next. And if this episode made you think of someone, maybe someone who has always felt like the odd one out in the family, maybe someone who keeps apologizing for being different, maybe someone who is quietly carrying the weight of believing there's something wrong with them, would you please send this episode to them? Because shame convinces us we are the only ones who feel that way. And sometimes all it takes is hearing someone says, "Me too," to realize you have never been broken in the first place. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for trusting me with something that's so deeply personal. I hope this episode reminds you to meet yourself with a little more curiosity, a little less judgment, and a lot more compassion. Until next time, my love, keep playing. Love, thank you for hanging out with me on Molly's Playground. If this episode spoke to you, share it on your social media and come say hi over at Instagram on Molly Pretzel. And who knows, maybe one day we'll take up space together in real life too. Until then, take your space, trust your voice, and keep playing. See you on the playground next week.